Path of Exile is a free to play action RPG that is now approaching 13 years old, but it gives you more freedom than almost any action RPG, to the point where you can completely ruin your character. So, after several thousand hours, I'm answering the question: should you start playing PoE in 2026 and join me in Wraeclast? So, you may be asking, isn't it just an old game that looks bad? Why is it worth looking into at all? What makes it different from other RPGs like Diablo? Well, outside of it being free to play, which Diablo is not, it has a far greater build diversity through its equipment, gems, ascendancy classes, and the massive passive skill tree. It contains more than 1300 nodes, and your class simply determines where on the tree you begin. You can use any skill with any class, because skills are tied to gems which you can place in your equipment rather than being tied to the class itself. The equipment can also connect the skill gems with other gems that buff the skill, so it gets stronger. Because you can make so many different combinations of gems linked together, the variety of attacks and spells you can use in this game is huge. This is even further increased through Ascendancy class system, which is when you reach a certain point in the game, you can ascend your character with 3 choices per class, which will further diversify the experience. This makes the game hard to master with a lot of player agency over how to build your character and how to play the game. At the same time, the massive amount of choices can be really off putting for new players, especially since you can very easily create a build that doesn't work well. For example, I had a friend who wanted to play it without any help, just figuring the game out for herself. And she made 2 different characters, which ended up struggling incredibly in the later parts of the campaign, until she made a third character that worked a lot better. Some players may have a similar experience as my friend and feel frustrated and quit instead of trying again. But if you like challenges or like me, a World of Warcraft player, feel like a lot of games in general are slowly eroding player agency and you don't like that, this game has the most player agency you could ever want. Before we dive deeper into the talent tree and skills, let's talk about how the game actually plays. From the start, you pick a class, and then every class starts the same way in the game with the same quest lines. The maps are randomly generated by pre made building blocks, so they will not look exactly the same every time but follow a similar layout. The graphics do look fairly old, but have been updated a few times over the last 13 years. The gritty and dark graphics can be a little hard for some players to get past, but this isn't really a game you play for the graphics. The game is top down, click to move, and you have a total of 10 slots that you can use for different skills. You have health and mana, which are displayed as globes in the bottom corners, defeating enemies to get loot, and every so often there is a boss fight. Sometimes it's a mini boss, and sometimes it's bigger fights. The game heavily revolves around seasons every 3 or so months, which usually come with a new mechanic. Over the many years, a lot of these seasonal mechanics have made it into the base game and will appear as extra content as you level up. It is everything from your own hideout to a mine or going on a heist for extra loot. The extra content is optional and you are not missing out on anything major by skipping over it until you get into the endgame. Once you do reach the endgame, all endgame mechanics become available to you. At this point in the game, there are a bunch of different mechanics to interact with, which can feel a bit overwhelming or like you've been pulled in several directions. However, after you have a better grasp of the game, it does feel great to be able to tailor your endgame content through the Atlas passive tree. Isn't there a PoE 2, and why not just play that instead? There is a PoE 2 being developed that is still in early access since December 2024. It was originally supposed to be a PoE expansion, but was later changed to be a standalone game. While a lot of PoE 1 has been brought over to PoE 2, such as the passive skill tree, there is still a large difference in play styles in Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2, which seems to be intended. PoE 2 is a slower paced and more methodical game, and when you reach an impasse, you only have a few ways to proceed compared to PoE 1, which gives you almost limitless options. While some people may prefer PoE 2, I personally much prefer the gameplay of the original game, and they are still continuously updating Path of Exile 1 every 3 or so months. There are 7 classes in the game, and like I said before, the main initial difference is where they start on the passive skill tree. The classes are Marauder, Templar, Witch, Shadow, Ranger, and Duelist that start on the edge of the tree and Scion, which starts in the center. Simply put, there are 3 different stats that you can focus on: strength, intelligence, and dexterity. And the tree is divided into 3 parts, with most of the intelligence nodes being at the top, most of the dexterity nodes being in the bottom right, and most of the strength nodes being in the bottom left. However, that doesn't mean you have to focus on intelligence if you pick the witch class. You can path far into the tree and pick up nodes in completely different parts of the tree to where you started. However, there is still something to be said for having a vague idea of what skill or what type of skill you want to use before choosing your class. If you want a fire skill, you probably want to pick up nodes that buff fire damage, and because most of the nodes are to the left of the skill tree, choosing the shadow class that starts in the top right might make going for a fire skill more difficult. That doesn't, however, mean you are doing it wrong if you try a build where you have to path far. Sometimes the top players of a season are playing builds where you have to path all across the tree. This is a Templar using the explosive arrow skill. As you can see, they started here and have picked up fire nodes close to where they started. And then they have gone all the way to the right side of the tree where there are a lot of bow nodes. As a contrast to that, this player has picked Shadow and the skills Essence Drain and Contagion and stayed in the top right hand side of the tree, near to where he started, because there's a lot of chaos damage nodes here. Basically, the passive skill tree is very big and you can path far if you choose to do so. Every class has access to a choice of 1 of 3 mini passive skill trees. These trees are a lot more specialized than the general tree. For example, the Witch has Elementalist, Occultist, and Necromancer. The Elementalist build focuses on cold, fire, and lightning damage. The Occultist focuses heavily on energy shield, chaos damage, and curses. And the Necromancer focuses on minions. Most skills can work with any class and fit somehow into one of the Ascendancies. However, it may not be as good as it could be. If you want a minion build with Summon Skeleton, Necromancer is the only good choice for Witch. Necromancer is generally considered the best choice in the whole game for Summon Skeleton, even though Ascendancies from other classes can still make the skill work. With more than 500 different active skill gems in the game, there is a lot to choose from when it comes to picking a skill. You have 10 slots on the UI for skills, but you should generally not pick 10 different damaging skills. Instead, you should get 1 or a few damaging skills, and then have defensives, movement skills, and buffs for the rest. On each gem, there are gem tags shown at the top. These indicate the gem's properties. For example, Frostbolt has the spell, projectile, and cold tags, because Frostbolt is a spell that fires a projectile that deals cold damage. Lesser Multiple Projectiles is a support gem with the projectile tag. By linking these together, Frostbolt will now fire 2 additional projectiles in a small cone, but each projectile will deal less damage. If I link Cold to Fire support gem with the Cold and Fire tags to Frostbolt, it will convert 50% of the cold damage to fire and deal additional fire damage. If I use both support gems at the same time, the Frostbolt will fire additional projectiles that all deal both cold and fire damage. Any piece of armor or weapon gear nearly always has 1 or more gem sockets. If it has more than 1 socket, they are not always linked. If you find a really nice piece of gear that you wish had linked sockets, you have ways in the game to try and re-roll the sockets and get them to be linked. Beyond the gem sockets, gear will also have stats. Most of it is similar to regular RPG games, with stats like crit and attack speed. But you can also get things like getting your gems levels increased, because yes, I haven't mentioned, but the gems have levels which increase their effects as you level them up. Or the gear could grant a specific skill. For example, these gloves, which grant level 25 Blight, any support gems that you socket into this item will affect the Blight skill. So here you could choose to place 4 support gems that all support Blight, which is what I did, or I could have placed 1 skill gem and had the 3 support gems buff both that skill and Blight. All of these things combined, classes, ascendancies, skill trees, skill gems, gem combination, gear, make for a huge amount of customization and depth, and there is not really any other game on the market that even comes close. So all of this seems really complex, and to be honest, it is. But that doesn't mean it's a wall for new players. You can get the game and play without any previous knowledge, and you can get pretty far in the game by just lucking out a little with the skill combinations you choose. You can also use a build guide from one of the many great PoE content creators. I personally like Zizaran, who does really top-notch guides, And if you use his guides, you should be able to progress fast through the main game and be able to get pretty far into the end game as well, all without having any special knowledge of the complexities of the game. That being said, if you want to understand what you are doing, there are a lot of intricacies to figure out. If you have played before and wondered if anything has changed a lot since the last time you played, the game has been streamlined a lot in recent patches. The introduction of the currency exchange makes trading a lot easier, and the changes to sockets where gems can be socketed into any color socket makes getting started a lot more approachable. So, to answer my initial question, should you play PoE 1 in 2026? If you enjoy experimentation, difficult games, and learning complicated systems, PoE will probably be for you. It is not a relaxed RPG that explains everything super clearly, and playing completely blind can be very punishing. But no other action RPG gives you this much control over what your character becomes. Considering the game is for free, what do you have to lose? Apart from 3,000 hours.